During this year, you've been looking at the 7 letters to the 7 Ecclesias in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. Predominantly, you've done a few other things. You've looked at the vision of the multitudinous Christ in chapter 1, and you've also looked at the overall structure of Revelation and what it looks like. But on the whole, you've been looking at these 7 Ecclesias and the 7 letters to them. And you would have seen over the course of the year a gradual degradation in the Ecclesias that you've been looking at. So you would have started in Ephesus, and Ephesus had lost its first love. They were pretty good, but they'd lost their first love. And then in Smyrna, which was pretty good as well. In fact, there's no condemnation about Smyrna, but sadly they had a rival community there that was bringing persecution on that ecclesia. And then you looked at Pergamum, and Pergamum went downhill. They had compromised the truth through apostasy, through a falling away, through believing what other people believe. And then you looked at Thyatira, and Thyatira had gone a step worse again. And Thyatira had corrupted the ecclesia because now they allowed error to be taught. They had members that were actually teaching the wrong thing, right in the middle of the ecclesia. And then to make matters even worse, you then looked at Sardis. And you remember when they opened their letter, and they pulled out the front of the letter and had a look, and they got all excited because it said that they were alive, but then they were dead. The 5th ecclesia, after that slow decline from all of those ecclesias, by the time it got to Sardis, they were dead. And there was no commendation at all, only condemnation. And that there's been this terrible slide that you've witnessed through the course of this year of all of those ecclesias. And our poor Lord Jesus Christ had to write a letter to each one of them. And it started off okay, and it went a little bit worse, and a little bit worse, a little bit worse, until the entire ecclesia was dead. And then our Lord Jesus Christ picked up the pen and wrote to Philadelphia. And he had a new, fresh change, because there was nothing bad that he could write about this ecclesia. Nothing at all, because this ecclesia was amazing. It was faultless in the words of chapter 3. Nothing wrong with them at all. And our Lord had penned these letters, and he'd gone from Ephesus and gone down and down and down to a dead ecclesia, an ecclesia for which he had died. He gave his life, his blood, his sweat and tears over 33 years, and that ecclesia was dead. There was nothing in that ecclesia that he found worthy of commending. And then he got to Philadelphia and he said, "This ecclesia is amazing. My life was worth it. I've given myself to this world. And here's ecclesia that's doing something really exciting for me." And that's the ecclesia that we're going to have a look at tonight. Now, you've seen great structure around these letters. You would have noticed that these letters aren't random, are they? They're not random in their selection, in their composition, in the things that are said in them. Each letter, as you would have picked up, picks up an attribute from chapter 1, an attribute of the multitudinous Christ, and picks up that little thing and draws it out in the letter. And each letter then has something in the letter that's fulfilled or referenced significantly later on in the book. So there's something from chapter 1, and then there's something that goes later in the book. And generally there's commendation and condemnation and counsel and challenge. All of these letters are structured. Nothing in this, of course, is random. But we ask ourselves the question, as you would have before, why 7 ecclesias? So there must have been hundreds of ecclesias. You just look at the book of Acts and all the letters that Paul wrote to, and all the ecclesias that we don't know about. There must have been so many ecclesias. And yet he writes to these 7. There must have been more that were larger. There were more that were better known. There was ecclesias in the Acts that just makes the pages really spring out, and yet these 7 little-known ecclesias are selected. Why did he do that? And again, it's because nothing in the Bible is left for chance. Nothing's random, nothing's by accident. This is deliberate. And you would know that the number 7 is a favourite number in the book. In fact, if you have a King James Version on your knee, the number 7 is used 59 times in this book. That's not a little number, is it? 59 times in this book, the number 7. And in the Bible, the number 7 is a special number. It's a number about spiritual perfection. It's not an accidental number, is it? God created this world not in 2 or 3 or 7 or 9 or 13 days. I said 7, I shouldn't have. But in 7 days. And at the end of that, God saw that everything was perfect. It was very good, and he rested, he ceased, and he said, I've nailed creation. It was perfect. So 7 in the Bible is a number of spiritual perfection. And when we come to these ecclesias, we see ecclesias that represented all ecclesias perfectly. And there they are in the middle, very cosmopolitan, all with different characteristics. Some amazing, some dead, some with apostasy, some with the teachings of error of the Nicolaitans, of Balaam, some who had persecution, some who had just lost that first initial love, some who were completely self-centered, but all of them different, and all of them representative of every single ecclesia. Your ecclesia is there, as is mine. And when one journeyed, and if they went from the capital of the Roman world in Rome and journeyed to the capital of the Jewish world in Jerusalem, or vice versa, if they did that journey by land, they went through this little area of 7 ecclesias that represented the entire ecclesial world. Nothing's left to chance, is it? Nothing in the scriptures is random. But importantly, we see that there's a larger, more significant inclusion in these ecclesias. And when our Lord comes to chapter 22, there's a hint that these letters are written for us all. And so in chapter 22, verse 16, I, the author, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify unto you these things to the ecclesias. Not just those 7 back in chapters 2 and 3, but at the end of the book, as he's given us all of those visions and taken us from Christ's day right to the kingdom and past the kingdom, past the millennium, past the 1,000 years, into the period where God will be all in all, as he gives us that continuous picture all the way down. In the last chapter and the last few verses, Jesus says, I'm writing this for you all the ecclesias, every single one of us. So all the ecclesias are included, and that means that their young people and our young people would have found something in these. Now let's just remember who the letter writer was. The letter writer was our Lord Jesus Christ. We all know that. Where was he? And yes, he's in heaven. But in chapter 2 and verse 1, in the letter to the ecclesia of Ephesus, it clearly says that he was there and he was walking among the 7 golden lampstands. Sure, he's in heaven at his Father's right hand. But where was he? He was walking in their midst. He's here tonight. He's in this hole. Now that gives us 2 lessons, doesn't it? That means 2 things. Firstly, if he's walking among the ecclesias, he knows what's going on. He knows what's going on in your ecclesia. He knows what's going on in your life. Your friend might not know what you looked at last on your web browser, but Jesus does. He saw you look. Jesus is walking through the Ecclesias. He sees every single thing. He's watching us, watching what we do, getting excited by things that are great and getting sad when he gets let down. So that's the first thing. But the second thing we note, that if Jesus is walking among the Ecclesias, then he's always close. And that's important too, isn't it? He's always at hand. He's not very far away. None of us can say, where's Jesus gone? I needed him and I couldn't find him. In my moment of greatest need, when I needed Jesus, he wasn't to be found. Jesus says Jesus walks amongst the Ecclesias. He's here tonight. He is very, very close. Okay, so we come to Philadelphia. What do we know about ancient Philadelphia? Well, today it's called Alasya. It's in modern Turkey. And 2,000 years ago it was called Philadelphia, and Philadelphia means brotherly love. That's an awesome name for an ecclesia, isn't it? Philadelphia, brotherly love. And it's just so typical of the way the scriptures work. It didn't mean they loved everyone just because they had that name, but you can tell in the words of their letter that they did. They lived up to their name. They loved their brothers. Now, as just a little bit of background, it was a comparatively modern city. And when we say modern, it was only built in the 2nd century before Christ, so the 2nd century BC, relatively modern for the cities in the area. But note this, it was in a volcanic and earthquake-prone area. And in fact, in AD 17, so this is when Christ was alive, perhaps in his teens, in AD 17, this city was destroyed by a massive earthquake. It was soon rebuilt, so they got straight onto it and rebuilt the city. A couple of other things. The soil was very fertile, and that was a result of all of the volcanic activity. So that the volcanoes and the lava that came down made the soil extremely fertile, and it was therefore used to grow grapes. And it was really, really well known for its vines and wine. And I think you can see links there as well, can't you, for the true vine and the ecclesia. It's all coming together, isn't it? This ecclesia that can be broken down but builds up really quickly. This ecclesia that's called brotherly love, that loves each other. This ecclesia that's well known for its vine. I am the true vine. And finally, they had these hot springs, which are very therapeutic and known for their healing. And they attracted the weak and the infirm to come and bathe and enjoy the hot waters, spa-like waters. So that's a little bit of the background to Philadelphia. It's worthy to note that, isn't it? As we go through these letters, and you would have done all of them so far, just that background we're going to find is important for the chapter. Okay, let's again note that this is the most positive of all of the letters. And in fact, it's only positive. There is nothing negative in this letter at all. So you recall that most of the letters typically have some positive things, some commendation, some negative things, some condemnation. But like Smyrna, this letter here has no negative areas at all. Now, how else do I know that it's positive? Well, here's an interesting thing. It has the longest and the most detailed of all of the titles at the start. Let me show you that. First of all, come back to chapter 2, verse 1. So each of these ecclesias has a title. Christ is writing. And he doesn't say, Dear Ephesus from Jesus. He says, Dear Ephesus, and he gives himself some titles. So if we look at chapter 2 and verse 1, the angel of the ecclesia in Ephesus write, doesn't say, Dear Jesus, it says, the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. See that? There's 2 little components of this title. Not Dear Ephesus from Jesus, but Dear Ephesus and then 2 titles. Let's have a look at the next one in verse 8, to Smyrna. To the angel of the Ecclesia in Smyrna write, how does he describe himself? The words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. So 2 titles again, 2 little subcomponents of who Jesus is. Verse 12 is about Pergamum. They're starting to go downhill. It's tougher to write good things about this ecclesia. Verse 12, the angel of the ecclesia in Pergamum write, the words of him who has the sharp 2-edged sword. There's only 1 title. It's tough to write good things about Pergamum. Now when we come to Philadelphia, did you notice the title? Chapter 3, verse 7. To the angel of the ecclesia in Philadelphia write the words of the Holy One, the True One, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one will shut, he who shuts and no one will open. So not only does this ecclesia have no negative condemnation but only positive commendation, they have got the biggest title of 5 components because Christ has picked these out specifically and says, I can work with this group. I got loads of me. I know what I'm like and I can identify in them. You know, Pergamum just got 1. Ephesus, okay, they got 2. Philadelphia, Christ loved them so much that there were 5 components of his life that he identified with that ecclesia. And he said, I can work with you. Let's go through the title. First of all, we note that these titles aren't random. Here's a tiny little quote from Brother Robert Roberts. He wrote a book on the Revelation called The 13 Lectures. And he says on the screen, the description of the Son of Man seen by John that is contained in the first chapter with the multitudinous Christ is the basis of the messages. And he goes on and he says they're all different, every one. All of these titles are different. He picks out something from chapter 1, just something, and brings it in and makes it a title and says, this bit of me, this is for you. I can see you in that. And in Philadelphia, he's got 5 bits. He loved Philadelphia. He could see himself in this ecclesia. Let's go through them. The first one, he that is holy. And as it should be, as the modern translations would read, the Holy One. And it means physically pure or morally blameless. It's got the idea of being clean, of being unblemished. And it's the first and it's the only time that this expression is used in Revelation 1, 2 and 3. Nowhere else. It's only here. Christ says, I'm holy and I'm writing to you as the Holy One because you know what? I can see me in you. I can see my holiness being reflected and manifested in you, and I like what I see. Well done. And then he says, and he that is true. And again, as the modern versions would correctly say, it should be, and he and the true one. The Holy One and the true one. So now he's saying, he that's real, that's genuine, that's not fake. It's the same word where Jesus in John was the true light in John chapter 1. It's the same word where Jesus says, I'm the true bread from heaven in John 6. It's the same word, the true vine in John chapter 15. It's the same word, the only true God in John chapter 17. You know all of them. Jesus says, I'm the real deal. I'm not a shadow. I'm not a figure. I'm not a symbol. I'm not like the law. I'm not pointing at things to come. I'm the real, true one. I'm He. And then he says in those words, I can write this because, Philadelphia, you get that. You see me as the true one. You understand who I am. You don't see me like the Judaizers and all those that want to go back to the law in Hebrews. You get the point. I am the real deal. I am the true one. What else does he say? Subtitle number 3, He who has the keys of David. It's a lovely little expression on the slide. You'll see it's taken from Isaiah 22. I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open, and none shall shut. He shall shut, and none shall open. We get keys, don't we? Probably half of you drove here tonight, or a third of you, or whatever it is, in your pocket, there's probably a key. If you've got a key in your pocket, that probably means that you're driving the car and you're in charge of the car. Someone might be sitting in the passenger seat and they can say all you want, but ultimately you're the boss of the car. The car goes and starts and stops when you say. And that's what Jesus is saying. When it comes to the line of David and the Davidic throne and the Davidic promises in 2 Samuel 7, he says, I'm the boss. If you want to come into 2 Samuel 7, I've got the key. I can do anything I want. I can let you in, I can open that, I can shut it. The entire lineage of David, Luke 1, 2 Samuel 7, all of that, Jesus says, it's all in my hand. I have the key of David. I determine its destiny. Imagine receiving a letter that said that. You go out to your letterbox, as Uncle Mike described last class, and open up the letter. And there's a letter that's signed off by saying, I've got the key of 2 Samuel 7. And I'm building a house, a spiritual house of people that are coming out of the loins of David, and not just that literally come out, but spiritually come out through adoption and baptism into the saving name of Jesus Christ. And that's how he signs off the letter. I've got the key. This is a wonderful letter, isn't it? To the Ecclesia at Philadelphia. Wouldn't we pay attention to that? And then he says, he that opens and no man shuts. I can open anything I want, says Jesus, and no man on earth has the power to shut it again. And if I decide to shut something, says Jesus, no man or woman on earth has the power to open it again. When it comes to exit, entry, access, I am in complete charge. 5 components. The longest amount. And he could work with this ecclesia. The other ecclesias, he might do 2. He might do 1. He could just identify them with just one of his attributes. Christ has got so many. And Christ says, when I look at you, Philadelphia, I can see myself as holy and true, as wanting the hope of the kingdom that David would give, who can open to you and who can shut as well. Okay, so we move on. And in verse 8, Christ says, I know your works. And thankfully, everything is positive. I know your works. And he says, what I'm going to do in verse 8 is I've set before you an open door which no one can shut. Now this term open door is used particularly in the Acts, but also in the Gospels, of gospel work. So it's generally used of gospel opportunities. I've opened a door. There's a great example in 1 Corinthians 16 where Paul says, I'm going to stay in Ephesus until Pentecost. Why? Because a wide door for effective work has been opened to me. I've seen an opportunity. This door has just been flung open. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 9. Christ is saying, I've opened a door for you. He's saying, go for it. It's all yours. And elsewhere, as we know that Christ is the door. Not only has he opened the door, but he is the door. He's saying, come through me. I am the door. Those who come through me will be saved. John 10. So he knew their works. He loved their works. And he says, open the door and come in. 2 months ago, I went to a funeral. And this funeral was for a 15-year-old girl. She was the daughter of a colleague at work. She was an incredible young lady in every aspect. She was lovely, well-liked, well-mannered, loved others. Everyone loved her. She was a national volleyballer. She was a national and international dancer. Her room was full of trophies, but she was really nice too. And then one night, as she was walking along with her friend, she was hit by a car, a Lamborghini, and she died. You might have read of that in the news. And at her funeral, there was over 2,000 people there, and there wasn't a single dry eye because she was just a really nice young girl. And she's dead. And young people, the door was shut. And Jesus Christ, who walks in our midst, who is here in this hall tonight, you think about this, has said to every single one of us in this hall, that's me, and that's every single one of you, you have the opportunity for an open door. This girl died at 15. Her door is shut. She will never see the light of day again. We can never think we are disadvantaged, can we? We can never think that others have more things than us. We can never be jealous or envious or think they've got a bigger car or they've got a better job or that young person's got more friends or I like what she's wearing more than what I'm wearing. We have an open door. We are the most blessed people in the entire world, says Jesus. And I've come to me, that's me, and Jesus has come to every single one of you, not the people in this world. And Jesus has said to us here tonight, I've got a door that if you want to, you can come through. Not many people in the world have that. What a blessing we have. Never think that we aren't privileged. Never think that others have more. Jesus has given us an open door. And you know what the best thing is? No one can shut the door. Except for Jesus. So he's got the key and he can shut doors so that they'll never ever open again, and he can open doors so that they'll never ever be shut again. But no one else can shut the door, your door. Those people at school that gave you a bit of grief during school, happens in all of our schools, doesn't it? Those people can't shut the door and keep you out. People at uni who challenge you a couple of times and maybe tempt you to do a few things that you know deep down you shouldn't be. They haven't got control over you. They can't shut the door. They can't keep you out. And the people at work, and they put extra temptations. They've got money now. They can do real good things. They're really attractive. But try as they might, they can't shut your door. Only you can do that if you don't respond to Jesus. No one can shut your door. I can't shut your door, and you can't shut mine. We've all got an opportunity to go for it. It might be that person that bullied you in grade 5 or 6, all of those people that have tempted you or challenged you or given you grief, but not one single person can shut your door. That's between you and Christ. Verse 8, no one can shut that. And I know that you have a little strength. The ESV has but a little power. It probably suggests that there weren't very many in number. It probably means that they were just a little ecclesia. It also could mean that they were poor of resources, because we know that they'd had earthquakes and we know that they had to rebuild them, and we suspect that they would have been taxed, maybe heavily, to rebuild the city. So whether it means that they had low financial resources, and it probably also means that they were of low number, Jesus says, I know what you've done, even though you were very small. And their size and their lack of resources didn't stop them from being active and vigorous, and your ecclesia can be active and vigorous too. We're in the Cumberland Hall tonight. A number of you might be members here at Cumberland. I don't know exactly, but I suspect that Cumberland would have nearly 200 members on their roll. Might be a few less, might be a few more now. It's a large ecclesia, isn't it? There's an ecclesia in Adelaide with less than 20 members. That's 10% of the size of this. There's ecclesias in Adelaide with 40 and 60 and 80 and 100, 120 and 140, 180, 200 members. One ecclesia in Adelaide has about 250 members. And the lesson from Philadelphia is that it doesn't matter how big your ecclesia is, your ecclesia can turn the world upside down if you want to. This is just a little ecclesia. You had little strength, a few numbers, low resources, and yet you did so much with what you had. And in verse 8, you kept my words. This is commendation indeed, isn't it? And I think you get this, but you probably won't get it completely until you're a little bit older. And that is that the best thing that can ever happen for a parent is when a child does what they've been asked or accepts some advice that they have been given. Deep down, I suspect you agree with that. You might not realise the full impact of that until later on in life when you have children yourselves. And conversely, there is nothing worse for a parent, and the Proverbs pick this up, for a child that says, no, it's not for me, I don't want to do what you want, Mum and Dad. I'd go and do my own thing. Disagree with your advice, disagree with how you brought me up. I'm me. And God feels the same way. He's exactly the same. There is nothing better for God than to have a child who's obedient. It's better than so many sacrifices. God says, I just want obedience. And yet, there is nothing that makes him more unhappy than the disobedient child as well. This ecclesia kept Christ's word. They went to their Bibles and they said, what does God want us to do? They knew Genesis, they knew the law, they knew the Old Testament, they knew the words of Christ. He'd only died about 60 years before. They probably had some recollections. Maybe their grandpa met him. They knew all of that. And this ecclesia said, doesn't matter what God says, I'm going to do it. Because they're obedient. And that's what parents really want. And that's what God wants. And when Jesus penned this letter, this would have been one of the greatest things that he could write. You know what? He says, you kept my word. and there's nothing better than a parent could want. And also at the end of verse 8, you haven't denied my name. Because lots of people do. I don't know whether you've been in the example perhaps when people say, who here is a Christadelphian? And the Philadelphian Ecclesia would have said, me, straight away. I'm a Christadelphian. Who here goes to church? Do you go to church? Me, I do, straight away. I go to church. Who here believes in the return of Christ? Me, says the Philadelphians, I do. I believe in the return of Christ. They never denied his name. Verse 9, sadly in that city there were those of the synagogue of Satan. And Jesus says, I'm going to make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, and they lie. I'm going to make them come and they're going to bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you, that I agaped you, that I gave my life for you. Now, who's the synagogue of Satan? Well, they were in the Ecclesia at Smyrna as well, so they're a group, probably Jews, Judaizers, who said they were Jews but weren't. Spiritual Jews, they'd seen the light, they'd been baptized into Christ, but then they said, no, it's not for us. And obviously they were separate. They'd gone out, they'd become their own synagogue. They weren't part of the Ecclesia. They thought differently, they taught differently, they had different views on the truth. And ultimately Jesus said, those people are going to come to you one day, and they're going to come to your feet and bow down before you, and they're going to find out that God loved the Philadelphian Ecclesia because they did what was right. And that's going to happen to all of us too. Those people at school who gave us grief. Those people at uni who tempted us to go out partying at night time and all the things that they love doing and going to the sports games and getting really wrapped into this world. And those people at work who tried to get you to talk like them and think like them and share their jokes and have their crass sort of behaviour and go in their places and drive their sorts of cars. All of those people are one day going to come to you and they're going to say, you know what? You were right. And those times that I pushed the boundaries and tried to deceive you or trip you or tempt you or influence you or set a bad example for you, all of those times I was wrong and you were right to stand up for what is right. And that's what the Philadelphian Ecclesia was doing. The synagogue of Satan, that other group who must have left them and gone somewhere else, who was challenging them, pulling them down, calling them names, and lying about them. Ultimately, they're going to come and they're going to say, I can see that God loved you. Verse 10. Because you have kept my word, there it is again, kept my word, about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. That word patience there, it means an abiding, an endurance, especially in the face of difficulty. It occurs 7 times in Revelation, so get that. This word patience, 7 times in this book, 5 of them in the first 3 chapters. See, patience is big for Ecclesias. Patience isn't something that we can do without. The ecclesial run is not a short run. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not this day or tomorrow. It's not over. Patience is a big thing for an ecclesia. So 5 of the 7 patients are in the letters, chapters 1, 2, and 3. It's a big thing for ecclesias. And this ecclesia, young people, endured. And they kept the word. Note that that's there twice. And so Christ says, I'll repay. In verse 10, he says, because you kept, I will keep. Now, if you've got a colouring in pencil, And for anyone that knows me and came tonight, you would have known there'll be a colouring opportunity. So if you've got a colouring pencil or a pencil or a really great memory, let's colour in these 3 keeps. See, they're linked. Nothing's by chance. Nothing's random. Verse 8, I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have, there it is, kept. You can circle or colour or do whatever you want to do. Kept my word. Okay. Now let's come down to verse 10. Because you have kept, there's the second one. Colour it in. Circle it. Do whatever you want. Because you have kept my word. Same verse about patient endurance. I will keep. There's the third. Colour it in. 3. And they're linked. It's so clear, isn't it? Verse 8, you kept my word. Verse 10, because you kept my word, I'm going to keep you. Cause and effect. They kept, Christ kept. I'll keep you from the hour of temptation or trial. And we know that they were going to have a lot of persecution in the next little while. This word keep, it means to guard or to watch over. It's only used 11 times in the book. 3 are in this letter. 3 of the 11. It's a magnificent word. I want to show you how it's used, please. We're going to look up 4 of them. Leave something in chapter 3. We'll be coming back. I just want to show you how this wonderful word is used. Come back to chapter 1. You know this verse. You probably did it in your first class back in February. Chapter 1, verse 3. Blessed is the one who reads. This is the blessing, isn't it? The blessing of those that read aloud the words of this prophecy. And blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it. What does keep mean? It means to guard, to watch, to take care of. And the chapter 1 verse 3, the blessings of chapter 1 verse 3 says, blessed are those who guard this word. Get the idea of this word? Keeping. Let's come over to chapter 16. You know chapter 16. It's the chapter of the vials or the bowls of God's wrath that are poured out. And you know verse 15. Behold, I'm coming like a thief, says Jesus. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments. Guarding, watching, taking care. See what a big word this is? This is not a little word. This is chapter 1 verse 3 blessing sort of word. This is chapter 16 verse 15 Christ returns sort of word. This is a big word. Now let's come through to chapter 22. We're not looking at all of these. If you wanted some homework, you can look up these. There's 11 in the book. There's not too many more. Let's come through to chapter 22. And the ultimate blessings of Christ's return as Christ wraps up this wonderful book. Chapter 22, verse 7. Behold, I'm coming soon. Blessed, again, blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. Verse 9. But he said to me, you must not do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers, the prophets, and with those who keep the words of this book. See how big this word is? Christ loves those that keep his word, that watch it, that guard it, that protect it, that love it, that soak it up. And of those 11 young people, 3 of them are in Revelation 3, 7 to 13, Philadelphia. You want to talk about keeping and guarding and loving and watching? That's how the Philadelphians lived their life. They loved the truth. Back in chapter 3 and verse 11. We now move on. We've done the commendation, we've done the wonderful things. They're a good ecclesia. Good on you, says Christ. Verse 11, we come to the counsel, or the warning. And he says in verse 11, "Behold, I come quickly." Now these words, they were written over 1900 years ago. And if you're like me, you're thinking that doesn't sound too quickly, does it? When we look at this word quickly, it can also mean speedily and suddenly, by surprise. And that's the way it's going to be. It's not speedily or quickly as in tomorrow. It's speedily or quickly as in when it comes, it's really going to come, and people aren't going to be expecting it. He says, be careful. I'm coming soon. Suddenly. Very quickly. Verse 11, hold fast what you have, so that no one can seize your crown. Now there's a connection in that verse, isn't there? And you can see that, it's so obvious. Hold fast, grab it, so that no one can take it. See the link there? Hold fast what you have, so that no one can take what you have, your crown. Well, there's the clear link. And so the possibility always existed, said Christ, that the crown of victory could be snatched away. They'd done all this work, and if they elected to follow man and left the truth and left the straight way, then all that work would go. Now the link, of course, is with the games, the Greek games. And you're a little bit familiar with this too, aren't you? There were 4 different sports festivals in ancient Greece, and collectively they were called the Panhellenic Games. And the most famous of them was the Olympic Games. So the Olympic Games was one of the 4 and the most famous, and the one that we still have today. And the games, and this is interesting, are also known as the Stephanitic Games. Bear with me, because winners received a garland, a laurel wreath for victory. And Stephanitic obviously comes from Stephanos. There's the link. 4 games. The Olympics is the most popular and well known and the one that exists today. And at the time, it was called that because they did what they did for a wreath. There was no financial or material prizes. Nothing. They did everything they did for a wreath. And they did lots of things in these games. They had boxing games, they had careful fighting matches, they had all-in fighting matches with just a couple of rules, they had chariot races, they had short running races, they had middle distance running races, they didn't have marathons, that's only a more recent thing in the late 1800s. But they had all manner of things, all manner of events, and everyone got the same thing. The winner just got a wreath, a laurel wreath, a Stephanos in the Greek, and that's what Jesus is saying here. Hold fast what you have, so that no one can take your wreath. Having won in the games. The laurel wreath, a whole lot of olive branches for the Olympiads, the Olympic Games, are wound into a circle or a horseshoe, placed on your head, your crown. Seize what you have, so that no one can take it from you. Now, this crown, though, would fade. They gave them literally an olive leaf crown, a laurel wreath made of olive leaves. And shortly that would go limp and brown, and then it would start to fall apart, and then it would flake away. And today, 2,000 years later, none of them exist. All of that work they'd done for that moment of glory and that laurel wreath, that was it. They contested for virtue, not for material prizes. They contested for the wreath. All of that work. And today, not a speck of it is still here. It's all gone. And they might have been popular at the time. They might have been heroes. People would have known their name. If you won a whole lot, you could actually get a statue of yourself. You were allowed to put one up at your own expense. But 2,000 years later, no one can remember who won the boxing in the second Olympiad. Who wore the laurel wreath? No one knows. Where is the laurel wreath? No one knows. And Christ says in Peter, he says, when the chief shepherd appears, you're going to receive the unfading crown of glory. And what that means is that they're never going to fade away. In 2,000 years, people are still going to be talking about you. No one knows who ran the second chariot race, or the second short sprint, or long sprint, or fight. And no one knows where their wreaths are. They are entirely gone. But in 2,000 years' time from today, people will be talking about you still, because your crown is immortal. Your future is too. And it will never, ever fade away. Now, none of us are elite athletes. Some of us might think we are in our moments of greatness in the morning as we do our push-ups on the floor. None of us can lay claim to what the Olympic athletes did. But I think we've all participated in some sort of challenge that we really, really wanted to win. And therefore we could possibly identify with an athlete who's trying to do their best, he or she. And elite athletes are very impressive. They're up early. Let's say they're up at 4:30 in the morning. And they're training in the morning, and the push-ups and the burpees that we hate, they do in their hundreds, and they churn them out during the day. And they're lifting and they're throwing and they're peaking at the right time, and their mental preparation is perfect as well. And they go to the games and they perform their absolute best. Can you imagine, young people, if you've done all of that work, perhaps years of preparation, and you're in the prime of your physical being. Your mind is absolutely brilliant, and you've competed and done your absolute best, and just as you put your hand up for the crown, someone else says, hang on, I think I'll take that instead. How would you feel? All of those 4:30 starts, all of the things you've done in your life, and Jesus says, hold on to that crown, because if you don't, someone else can come and snatch it away. He's saying, you've got a crown that's on your heads, and I want you to grab your crown, says Jesus, with two hands. Don't you ever, ever let that go. Because it doesn't take much for someone else, someone at school, someone at uni, someone at work, someone who influences someone in this hall, to snatch it and say, not interested, and toss it away and go and do something stupid. Christ says, my challenge to you is you take that crown and you never, ever, ever let it go. Well, this Ecclesia is so positive, isn't it? It had the longest introductory title, it had only commendation, and we're going to finish now in a few minutes with the best finish. It had the best outcomes and promise that was made to it. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Longest title, all commendation, and the biggest promise. What's the promise? Verse 12. To the one who conquers, to him that overcomes. See the change? We're not talking to Philadelphia anymore. We're talking generically, anyone who conquers. Anyone. That's us. You want to conquer? Verse 13. He that has an ear. Anyone. So it's not personal about Philadelphia anymore. Anyone who conquers, anyone who has an ear. Verse 12. I'm going to make him a pillar in my temple. Now, to be a pillar is a principal part of a building. Some of them are there for aesthetic reasons, to look good. Generally, they're there to play a role, a structural role. They're part of the building. They don't move. And that might sound boring, but once you've lived in a volcanic activity area with earthquakes that rock your city and push you down, hearing about being a pillar was the ultimate promise. You're not going to move ever again. You're not going to have to rebuild your city. You're not going to have to rebuild your life. You're not going to have to worry about dying or being covered in ash and lava. You're not going anywhere. The one who conquers, says Christ, he's going to be a pillar. And he's going to last forever. And he says, finally, I'm going to put some names on him. Verse 12, never shall he go out. I'll write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. He says, I'm going to write 3 names on you. Why did he say that? Why did he say, I'm going to write names on you? Where's the link? Next coloured pencil, just the second one we need tonight. Let's pick up back in verse 8. They had not denied, right at the end there, my name. Colour in name. Because that's what it's all about. If we don't deny Christ's name, verse 8, colour in name, then Christ is going to write the names on us. So now come down to verse 12. The 3 names there. I'll write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, and right at the end, my new name. Now you think what that means. There's 4 names there. At the start, you haven't denied my name. At the end, I'm going to write 3 names. I love what you're doing, says Christ. You think what that is. The first name was the name of God, Yahweh. Acts 15 says God is taking out of the Gentiles a people for his name. And to have the divine name, this is not small stuff, is it? This is Exodus chapter 3. This is stuff at the burning bush. This is God's memorial name. This is who I am. Moses says, who is it? Who shall I say has sent me? This is memorial name. And Christ says, I'm going to write that name on you. A name confers authority, doesn't it? He trusts us. He says, I'm happy for you to be called by my Father's name. And the New Jerusalem, the name of the New Jerusalem, the name of the city. And the New Jerusalem, Revelation 21 says, is the bride of Christ. So this is the bride, the multitudinous Christ. I'm going to have the name of the Father and my bride, says Christ. My people, my bride. Now that's beautiful, isn't it? When we get married, we might have a wedding ring. We might have our bride's name written on it, or a little promise written on the inside of our ring. And Jesus says, I'm going to write my Father's name and my bride's name, and what's the third one? My new name on all of us, on you and on me. Christ says, my new name. And no doubt it is the same name, but no longer is it just Jesus, Saviour, Yah will save, or Christ, the anointed, the Messiah, the King, but now he is all of that. He is King of the earth. This is his marriage feast. He's the Son of God. He's living forever and ever, and his name is just in awe to everyone. It's fulfilled. It's the real deal. It's true. Young people, I can't think of anything better than for Jesus Christ to come to any one of us and to say, come here, friend, and put his arm around you and get out his pen and write Yahweh and the bride and Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on us. That's the promise to Philadelphia. And the aim is to overcome, isn't it? And in verse 13, well, maybe we have just a little unhappy ending. Just a little one. And he says in verse 13, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the Ecclesias. You see, what this verse is saying is that even though this Ecclesia is amazing, it's got the biggest title, it's only got commendation, it's got no condemnation, it's got a huge promise. It's going to have 3 names written on us. We're going to be a pillar, we're going to exist forever, we're never going to move again. Jesus says, even though I love your Ecclesia, he says, I know that sadly, not all of them are going to listen. That's what verse 13, just sadly, it's the only just little sobering point, isn't it? He said, after everything I've said, he that has an ear, not all of you, says Christ to Philadelphia, are going to listen. He that hath an ear, let him hear. Let him hear what the Spirit says to the Ecclesias. And the aim is to overcome. We read that, didn't we? And there's no other word expressing the exhortation in this book, in this whole book, as it goes through the letters and the visions and the history of that telescopic 7 by 7 by 7, ends up in the vision chapters of the future age when Christ is all and there's no more sea. It's a wonderful book. It tells us about the continuous historical record from Christ through to the end of the ages. And there's no greater exhortation than just to overcome, to beat the world, to beat ourselves, to beat our lusts, to beat our temptations, and to do what's right. And so finally, Jesus says through John, for everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is that overcomes the world except the one who believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? So, young people, Christ has said tonight, I've set before you a door, and it's an open door. And an open door is freedom. And it doesn't matter what the kids at school, or the young people at uni, or the people at work, the people in the street. It doesn't matter anything what they do. No one can shut it. And Christ says, if you keep my words and endure patiently and confess my name and be faithful right to the end, you can come through that door and live with me forever. Let's do that.